They were told it would be quick. They were told it would be clean. But what began as a limited mission turned into one of the bloodiest military campaigns in American history. By the time it ended, the cost would be measured in eggs, broken trust, and a war that refused to be forgotten. After nearly a century of French colonial rule, Vietnam had erupted in a fierce battle for independence. The French were driven out, but peace never followed. In the south, Ngo Dinh Diem led a corrupt and authoritarian government, backed by the United States. His regime crushed dissent, jailed opponents, and ignored promised elections. In the countryside, communist fighters known as the Viet Cong launched an insurgency to reunite the country. The United States, determined to stop the spread of communism, offered support, advisors, equipment, money. But it wasn't enough. In August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident gave Washington the justification it needed. After reports, still disputed, of North Vietnamese patrol boats firing on American destroyers, Congress handed President Lyndon Johnson sweeping authority to wage war. The next step was inevitable. In March 1965, the first U.S. combat troops landed in Da Nang. They came ashore to cheering soldiers and bright television cameras. Most believed they were there to protect airbases and stabilize South Vietnam. But within weeks, they were patrolling the jungles, engaging in firefights, and learning the war would not be as simple as they were told. What followed was Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam that would last for nearly 4 years. American warplanes struck supply routes, military bases, and industrial sites across the country, especially near Hanoi, Haiphong, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But the North Vietnamese adapted quickly. While American bombers pounded North Vietnam from the sky, a hidden lifeline was quietly keeping the war alive. Winding through the dense jungles of Laos and Cambodia, the Ho Chi Minh Trail became one of the most critical arteries of the entire war. It was not a single road, but a vast network of dirt paths, underground tunnels, and supply caches, constantly rebuilt and expanded by hand. Thousands of North Vietnamese soldiers, porters, and workers moved weapons, food, and reinforcements down the trail every day, carrying supplies on bicycles, by foot, or in Soviet-supplied trucks. The trail stretched over 12,000 miles by the war's peak, snaking through mountains, valleys, and rainforests, often invisible to U.S. planes flying above. To stop the flow, the U.S. launched massive bombing campaigns, especially in Laos, where more bombs were dropped than on all of Europe during World War II. Villages were erased. Craters scarred the landscape. From November 14 to 18, 1965, the Battle of Ia Drang marked the first major clash between U.S. troops and the North Vietnamese Army. American forces, dropped into a remote valley by helicopter, were surrounded and nearly overwhelmed. After days of intense fighting, the battle resulted in approximately 305 American soldiers killed and over 800 wounded. North Vietnam losses were estimated between 1,800 to over 2,000 killed. It was a glimpse into the future, a war not of clear victories, but of survival and statistics. By 1966, nearly 200,000 American troops were deployed across Vietnam. By the end of the year, that number had more than doubled. Helicopters roared over rice paddies. Patrols combed through jungles. But the enemy was elusive. U.S. soldiers fought an invisible war, where every step could trigger a landmine, every villager could be a lookout, and every shadow might hide a sniper. The jungles of Vietnam became a battlefield where firepower did not always mean control. American commanders, unable to capture territory that stayed held, measured progress in body counts. Victories were statistics: how many enemies killed, how many bunkers destroyed. But each success felt hollow. To deny the Viet Cong food and shelter, the US unleashed chemical warfare. Agent Orange stripped forests bare. Napalm burned through villages. The goal was to eliminate cover, but it also scorched the earth, poisoned crops, and scarred civilians forever. In Washington, Lyndon B. Johnson insisted the war was going well. But the televised images told a different story. Soldiers marched through mud and blood. Helicopters carried out the wounded. Families back home watched in silence. And the protests began to grow louder. At the start of 1968, America believed victory was near. Then came Tet. On January 30th, during the Vietnamese New Year holiday, more than 80,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers launched a coordinated surprise attack on over 100 cities and military bases across South Vietnam. Explosions lit the night sky. Saigon was under siege. Even the U.S. Embassy was breached. The Battle of Hue raged for nearly a month. House by house, room by room, U.S. Marines and South Vietnamese forces fought to retake the ancient city. It resulted in heavy losses on both sides. Civilian casualties were staggering, leaving tens of thousands homeless. In America, trust in the government cracked. News anchors questioned official statements. College campuses erupted in protest. President Johnson, shaken by the public backlash, stunned the nation. On March 31st, he announced he would not seek re-election. The war had claimed its first political casualty. Richard Nixon entered the White House with a promise to end the war with honor. His strategy was called Vietnamization: slowly withdraw American troops while training South Vietnamese forces to take over the fight. In public, it sounded like a solution. In reality, the war was far from over. Even as U.S. troops began leaving, the conflict widened. In 1970, Nixon authorized a secret bombing campaign in Cambodia, targeting North Vietnamese bases along the border. Then, he ordered a ground invasion. It was meant to cut off the enemy's supply lines. Instead, it ignited fury back home. Over 500,000 protesters marched on Washington. Veterans threw away their medals in defiance. The war was not just being fought in Southeast Asia, it was being fought in the hearts of Americans. With U.S. troops still leaving, the burden fell heavier on South Vietnam. From February 8 to March 25, 1971, their forces launched an offensive into Laos to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The mission, known as Operation Lam Son 719, ended in disaster. Without U.S. ground support, the South Vietnamese faltered. The retreat turned chaotic. Helicopters rushed in under fire to pull survivors out. The following year, North Vietnam made its boldest move yet. The Easter Offensive in 1972 saw regular divisions, tanks, artillery, and tens of thousands of soldiers invade from the north. Battles raged across the country. Cities fell. But the United States still held the skies. Nixon ordered Operation Linebacker, a massive air campaign. B-52s returned with vengeance. Bombs fell on Hanoi, Haiphong, and supply routes. Slowly, the offensive was pushed back. The cost was immense. Tens of thousands died on both sides. Cities were leveled. And once again, civilians paid the highest price. Yet, with the battlefield in flux, negotiations in Paris were gaining traction. America was tired. The Paris Accords called for a ceasefire, the return of prisoners of war, and the withdrawal of all remaining U.S. troops. For America, the war was over. But for Vietnam, the war would continue. The South stood alone. The North had not given up.